Welcome to Hacking Your ADHD. I'm your host, William Kerb, and I have ADHD. On this podcast, I dig into the tools, tactics, and best practices to help you work with your ADHD brain. Hey team, feels like it's been a while for me, but hopefully I was able to prepare enough so that you guys didn't notice so much. And the reason it's been a while for me is because of the 2024 International Conference on ADHD, which is a collaborative event put on by CHADD, that's Children and Adults with Attention Hyperactivity Disorder, ADDA, the Attention Deficit Disorder Association, and the ACO, ADHD Coaches Organization. So the conference caters to adults with ADHD, educators, coaches, organizers, clinicians, therapists, really anyone who is affected by ADHD either directly or indirectly. There are all kinds of presentations at the conference, workshops, peer-to-peer discussion groups, networking opportunities, and there's also an exhibit hall. And this was my first year presenting at the conference. So in this episode, I'm going to go into some of my reflections on attending this year's conference, things I did, things I learned, and of course, some of the stuff about my presentation. If you'd like to follow along on the show notes page, you can find that at hackingYourADHD/205. But before we get started, I also wanted to get through a little housekeeping. So, as you may or may not know, I do have a Patreon, which can be easily accessed at hackingYourADHD.com/Patreon. And the update I wanted to give everyone here is that I am reworking a lot of what is going on with that Patreon, and changing it to a pay-what-you-want model, meaning that all the levels of the Patreon will receive the same stuff. You can pay $0, or you can pay $2, or you can pay $10, and it'll all be the same. The only real difference coming from the roles that are assigned on the Hacking Your ADHD Discord. Which reminds me that I also wanted to announce that we're now going to be on Discord, which you can get access through from the Patreon, which again is pay what you want. So it's free if you want it, or if you want to kick a few bucks my way, that's also appreciated. So if either of those things sound interesting to you, or one or both, go check out hackingYourADHD.com Patreon and you can get yourself some access. And I also wanted to let everyone know that Hacking Your ADHD is now available on YouTube. It's just audio for now, so you won't be able to see my beautiful mug quite yet, but it's also something that we're working on. And also behind the scenes, there's a lot more going on as we head into 2025. I know that is a weird year to be going into. Half a century into the 2000s. But hopefully I can get some good changes into how the podcast is running while having the same great content. So if you've got any questions or comments, head over to hackingYourADHD.com/contact and send them over. I do read everything that comes through, even if I'm not that great about responding, so sorry about that second part, but yeah, I will see it. Alright, keep on listening to find out about the 2024 International Conference on ADHD. Now, before I get into anything, let's talk about what the conference is actually like. This year, it was held in Anaheim, California, so basically just down the street from Disneyland. And I kind of feel like mid-November Southern California has much nicer weather than a lot of the country, so felt like this was a good location. And was also great for me since I didn't have to switch time zones. In general, the conference has a fantastic atmosphere. Basically, everyone there has ADHD or is at least quite used to the people who have it. There are a lot of friendly faces and people excited to talk to you. I had countless fun conversations with people I just happened to be sitting next to in one presentation or another, or sometimes multiple in a row. That said, the conference can also be a little intense. The schedule is jam-packed with presentations, workshops, and all sorts of things that my ADHD brain says, oh yeah, do this one too. One of the most important things I've learned from attending is to pace myself, and that it's okay to be missing stuff. Plus, there are all the people that I want to talk with that I only get to see in person once a year, so I do have to be choosy with what I am seeing. This year was also fun because by the time I got around to booking my hotel arrangements, all the conference hotel rooms were booked. And do mind you, this was months after my proposal was accepted and I planned on attending. Just a little bit of ADHD for you there. But I found a place that was basically right next to the Anaheim Conference Center. I was feeling pretty proud of how well I adjusted there. Which honestly should have been a red flag for me because it turns out the conference wasn't being held at the gigantic conference center, but at the conference hotel. But it turned out fine since that was only like a 15-minute walk away. Great exercise to start the day. But it did feel like a moment where the ADHD won yet again. The conference is a 3-day-long event, always Thursday to Saturday, with Thursday being a professional day and Friday and Saturday being just the general conference. I started Thursday with Dr. Carolyn Parcells' presentation, Management of Medications for the Treatment of ADHD, which I know sounds like a real banger. Honestly, Dr. Parcells did an amazing job with the presentation, though. It provided a lot of good information about the specifics of what kind of medications are used to treat ADHD, as well as a lot of stuff about assessing what's working and when you need to think about changing things up. She's definitely someone I want to get on the podcast at some point because I'd love to be able to put some of that stuff out on medication. But since I'm not a doctor, I'm not that comfortable doing that myself. Another highlight from Thursday was Dr. Abraham Oren's presentation on his new function-based method for diagnosing and treating ADHD. The idea behind his approach is to focus on 5 key brain functions: attention, organization, working memory, activity level, and decision-making speed, and use those for comprehensive clinical assessments based solely on patient self-reports with family and teacher input. It definitely looked like something that was worth looking into, since a lot of the current assessment stuff for ADHD often focuses more on how the individual is disruptive to those around them instead of how their ADHD is actually affecting them. So definitely something I want to look into more. So that was Thursday, and then once the general conference started, I basically lost my mind and it's mostly a blur. The day started with a keynote from Penn Holderness, who is an online content creator and recently wrote with his wife the book ADHD is Awesome, a guide to mostly thriving with ADHD. I'm going to be honest that I was fairly apprehensive about this keynote, since ADHD is Awesome sounds like another ADHD superpowers thing, which is something I'm not really all that on board with. So I was pleasantly surprised when he mentioned this idea and how someone brought up to him that the idea that ADHD superpowers tend to be a thing that's only promoted by white men because of the support systems that they get from spouses and parents. And that's a message I can get behind, that we can thrive with our ADHD if, and this is a big if, that we have those support systems in place that let us do so. While there can be great things about ADHD, more often than not, they are completely overshadowed by all the things that ADHD makes so much harder. Because yeah, if we don't have to worry about all those things that are hard, well then of course ADHD isn't going to be a huge problem. I mean, it's still going to be a problem, but if I didn't have any serious consequences from all the things that I was late for, or didn't finish, or just completely forgot about, the management side of things wouldn't be nearly as big of an issue. So I was relatively happy with the keynote, and I think Penn might be a fun person to eventually try and have on this podcast. So then also on Friday, I recorded an interview with Brendan Mahan for his Influencers Lunch Chats that I believe he is eventually going to be posting on his podcast, ADHD Essentials. Guess I should check in with him about that at some point. It was actually a great interview, and that gave me a lot to think about for the rest of the day, and along with the other interviews they did that were also great. And of course, there were a ton of other people I talked to and events that I attended, but the big thing for me this year was that I was also the first year that I was presenting. And so that took up a considerable amount of my mental focus because I was also trying to make those last-minute updates to my slides and presentation. In fact, I didn't finalize my slides until about an hour before the presentation. Although, to be honest, I think that's kind of expected for a lot of the speakers at an ADHD conference. As for my presentation, I wasn't expecting too much of an audience because it was late in the day on the third day of the conference, and I know at that point a lot of people have gone through enough sessions to really be feeling it. But instead, I had an entire room full of people and they had to turn people away at the door. So sorry to anyone that missed the presentation. Wasn't what I was expecting either. Anyway, my presentation was Outsourcing Executive Function with AI, which, if you follow along on the podcast, you may know is the title of an episode I put out earlier this year. Writing and publishing that episode was actually part of my prep for the presentation. I figured that if I did an episode, I could base my slides off of that. It worked better in theory than in practice, but it was definitely helpful to pull on that stuff, so I had stuff ready when I needed it. Now, how did the presentation actually go? Now, I don't want to be too critical here because it seems like the audience enjoyed the presentation, but while I was going through the presentation, I felt like there were a lot of things that I could have changed or done a better job explaining. So not saying it was bad, but I'm disappointed with the end result. And again, I don't want to come off as too critical because I think what was presented was good, just there were parts that could have been made much better. And I want to mention this because in a lot of ways, this is another place where it felt like the ADHD was winning. Because there were so many times in the year that I could have put in this time, but instead I was doing it right before. With that said, if anyone's interested in seeing the slides I prepared for the presentation, not the presentation itself because I don't have that recorded at this moment, but if you want to see those slides, you can find them at hackingYourADHD.com/slides. Also, if anyone is interested, there is also an online version of this conference happening March 7th through 8th in 2025. The online conference is a completely different conference than the in-person conference and will have a whole new set of presenters. I will not be presenting, so don't look for me. I had considered putting together a presentation, but again, the ADHD one, and I didn't. If you're interested in the next in-person conference, that's going to be in November 2025, and I believe it's going to be in Baltimore, but I'm not certain about that. I heard something else the other day, and it's not quite up on the website yet. I also wanted to include a quick section about Disneyland, which I did go to afterwards with my family, and you may be asking, well, why is this included at all? But it is relevant, because I mainly want to talk about is the disability access services, which are designed to assist guests with disabilities that make waiting in line difficult. And ADHD fits the bill here. While there is no official list of what qualifies here, it seems like it's primarily for cognitive and developmental conditions like ADHD, autism, and anxiety. Basically, the way it works is that after you sign up for the service and you have been approved, when you're at the park, you can use the app to sign up for rides via your DAS pass and use the Lightning Lane. But here's the thing, you don't actually skip the waiting part. You just don't have to do it in line. So you look it up on the app and it says Space Mountain has a 45-minute wait. I sign up with the DAS pass and it books me a time that I can use the Lightning Lane in 45 minutes. So it makes it so I'm still waiting, but just not in the long line. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because this is a fantastic way to make an accommodation. Because while I was looking at some of the things online for what the wait times for these rides would be, when they were getting up to that 45-minute level, I just knew those were things I wouldn't regularly wait in line for. But with the DAS pass, that was something that I was willing to do. And so literally, this accommodation made these things accessible for me. And really, that's what I just want to mention because I think this is a great way to do accommodations and is a great way to think about accommodations. How can we do things differently so that we can serve people who might need help in a little bit different way? Thanks for sticking with me all the way to the end. But I don't think we're going to do a quick rundown of today's top tips because I don't think they're quite necessary for this episode. I do want to remind everyone again about the Discord and the Patreon, which you can get access to at hackingyyouradhd.com/Patreon. And again, it's pay what you want. Don't feel bad if you can't kick anything my way. I appreciate it if you can, but I completely understand if that's not in the cards for you right now, or it's just not something you want to do. I also want to remind people that you can go sign up for the Hacking Your ADHD newsletter, any and all distractions, at hackingyyouradhd.com/newsletter. And for this episode, I'd love to hear what you thought, so you can feel free to connect with me over at hackingyyouradhd.com/contact. If you'd like links or to read this episode's transcript, you can go to the show notes page at hackingyyouradhd.com/205. And now for your moment of dad. A snake walks into a bar and bartender goes, "How did you do that?"